Questionably Evil. And what's even more evil is they got away with it.
Did you find her attractive?
Not really, no. She was kind of, I don't know, she just had like, she was almost bald. She had like really thinning hair. And
We're going to have to cut this interview, Nick. I'm not going to go into any more detail.
They didn't particularly care for people.
I don't know how you would expect someone to feel. I mean, if they told you tomorrow how would you feel?
Days after just turning 18, Brianna, the eldest daughter of her family, noticed strange occurrences in her house. We're talking glasses smashing off of counters, TV turning itself off and on when nobody was in the room, etc. She said that she could feel in the corner of the room there was something lingering in the darkness. She could feel like something was watching to see her reaction. Well, one night Brianna saw a girl's figure in the garden, but when she went out to investigate, what she found shocked her. Placed on a mound of dirt were teeth, which suddenly disappeared when Brianna turned around. She looked online for answers, and then she discovered evidence that it was maybe a poltergeist haunting her. Despite her terror, her parents wouldn't believe her, and she was left feeling even more alone and unable to sleep for fear that the ghost would get her. She continued having nightmares, including one where she felt a cross being burnt into her arm. The more incidents that occurred, the more she would confide in her mother, and the mother would dismiss the nightmares. But Brianna was left with a feeling that her mother did in fact know what was going on, but not telling her anything. Eventually, her mother told her she'd had experiences of the paranormal when she was growing up, which had led her to burying a mysterious package to protect the house. Her mother went to see a witch doctor who had told her of the curse on their family, which was why she saw a charred face standing at the bottom of her bed at night. Thomas Randelli was on his deathbed when he confessed to his only daughter that he was one of America's most wanted fugitives and had been on the run for more than 5 decades. Ashley was like, it felt like a weird dad joke. He was the king of terrible dad jokes. And at that moment she was like, okay dad, you changed your name and the authorities are looking for you. Sure, haha, sure they are. But she said that when he told me his name, his real name, she looked him up and she saw all of these articles like Voltaire robs bank, and she realized, yeah, that's my dad and the authorities are looking for him. Thomas was a 20-year-old bank teller at the Society National Bank in Cleveland when he walked out at the end of his workday on a Friday in 1969 with a paper bag containing $215,000, which is like 1.7 million in today's money. The theft wasn't discovered until a few days later, and he was never seen again. This is a twisted family joke that turned out to be based on an even sicker reality. For many years, the West Offspring were told, if you're naughty, you'll end up like Heather under the patio in the back garden. Well, when the police heard about the disturbing family joke and began to investigate, they uncovered a terrifying husband and wife serial killer team, Fred and Rosemary, or Rose West, who targeted unsuspecting young women and even 2 of their own descendants for their own warped means. While living on Cromwell Street in Gloucester, England, the couple turned a basement playroom into a chilling chamber of hell, where victims would be harmed, killed, and buried under the cellar floor. When the couple ran out of space there, they moved to the garden, where even more innocent victims were buried. 2 Illinois brothers claimed they buried the bodies of their sister and mother in their family's backyard, at least according to police. The brothers told investigators during interviews that their mother died in 2015 after being pushed down the stairs by their sister, and then they claimed their sister died of the big bad C disease in 2019, although this particular virus wasn't detected in the US until January of the next year. State officials had no record of either woman's death, and the brothers were like, yeah, we buried them because we couldn't afford a funeral. Well, when the police dug up the women, they also found several animals buried in the backyard. And by the way, the version of events offered by the brothers changed several times as they spoke with investigators. The pair had accessed their residence by crawling through a window, and they'd kept animals there, and this was a hoarder's paradise. Ugh, icky. 5 family members pleaded not guilty in 2019 on charges connected to the deaths of 2 offspring whose bodies were found buried in the backyard of a Georgia home. Mary and Elwyn Crocker were each barely old enough to babysit when they died 2 years apart, according to investigators, and their bodies were found buried behind their family's home. 5 family members, including their father, their stepmother Candace, are charged with felony killing, cruelty, and other crimes. Other suspects include Kimberly Wright, Candace's mother, her boyfriend Roy Prayer, and step-uncle Mark Anthony Wright. Jackson and Dale Villarda's home was a full house with 5 offspring, 2 of whom were from Dale's previous marriage. But on January 13th of 1984, Dale decided to go on a solo day trip, and everything was normal until Chris, one of Dale's descendants from the previous marriage, failed to return home. That night, Chris's mother reported him missing with the local police department, but in a strange twist of fate, his family received a telegram addressed to Dale and signed with Chris's name that same week, which seemingly explained his sudden departure. The note said Chris was going to run away from home to LA, don't worry about him, but there was some alarm bells that went off for the family, because there was an apology in the letter. An apology for being very rude, along with the phrase, Jackson was right. Sadly, the family eventually moved away, no leads were found, until a young couple living in California in 1998 wanted to renovate their home. The husband went into the crawl space under the residence and found a shoe. Days later, the wife's sister went to investigate the strange shoe, and she was horrified to find that it was actually connected to what appeared to be human bone. Soon enough, the identity of the body was confirmed. It was Christopher, and he'd been fired at once in the head and twice in the back from behind, and the nature of his wounds suggested that it happened at a close range. So police flew to Ohio, where Chris's sister had since relocated, and she told the police that their stepfather, Jackson, had been extremely strict, and Chris was not always willing to follow his rules because Jackson wasn't his dad. Investigators, curious as to how the family could continue to live in a house with a body buried underneath it without knowing, asked the sister about the smell that must have lingered, and she told them that her parents said that a pet snake had likely died somewhere on the property. So the police called Jackson in for questioning, and he admitted that he and Chris had not gotten along well, but he reiterated his belief that Chris had run away from home, and denied the smell, which all the other family members said was like, yo, dead snake. Meanwhile, other investigators were at the family's home executing a search warrant and found a receipt suggesting that the telegram that had allegedly been sent by Chris had actually been charged to the family's home phone bill. In the records at the couple's home, police also found a revolver and ammunition that matched the injuries. You can put 2 and 2 together and make 4, right? At first, this next case seemed like a bizarre case of a middle-class family who packed up their home and fled to another continent for a new life. Neighbors of the Dupont de Ligonnès and their 4 offspring called the police when they noticed the family home in the northwestern city of Nantes seemed unusually deserted. The descendants' school had been notified of a sudden job transfer to Australia, the family's home had been emptied, and the mailbox was taped up with a note, "Return all mail to sender." But when police looked closer at the townhouse and the suspicious building work on the patio, they found a severed human leg in the garden. Further digging revealed a one-legged corpse and 4 others, and with them were the corpses of the family's 2 Labradors. To this day, police are still searching for the father, Xavier Dupont de Ligonnès. One online user mentioned their uncommon family name was changed back in the late 1920s to a very generic surname. But only 3 people knew why, and they were sworn to secrecy. The last survivor finally fessed up literally hours before he passed away. So it turns out a family member had planned to marry the daughter of a high-ranking Chicago crime family member. The capo of the crime family not only objected, since the family wasn't white, not Italian, and mixed marriages were a no-no at the time, threatened the entire family if the wedding or an elopement were to happen. So to survive, the family changed their name, moved to Wisconsin in the middle of the night, trying to disappear. The wedding never happened, but their ancestor was terrified of either the crime boss or his spurned daughter locating the family. So it was sort of a rudimentary witness protection plan. An anonymous poster online was with their great-grandmother when she died, although they'd only gone to help their mom and grandma through the process. They weren't super close with great-grandma. They were reading next to her at one point, and she piped up and was like, "You know Robin was my niece and not my sister, right?" And now this poster was like, "I don't know what you're talking about," and was like, "Yeah, of course." So great-grandma passes away the next day, and a week or so later, this online poster is like, "Hey, mom, what's this about?" So it turns out, and still at the time, when Big Sis got pregnant, kinda young, her parents sent her away and then raised what came out as a sister and not a grand. You know what I mean. A family known as the most inbred in America has been left with a series of heartbreaking genetic defects that were sparked by a pair of identical twin brothers. So the Whitakers, who live in the small village of Odd in West Virginia, have a complex history. Some of the family can only communicate through grunts and barks, and they often flee when outsiders try to speak to them. They can struggle to remember their parents and other relatives, and didn't realize until recent years that the issues were kind of due to inbreeding. The cycle of inbreeding began with identical twin brothers, Henry and John, and then their offspring married each other and had a dozen descendants. John had 9 offspring with his wife and first cousin, Ada Riggs, including one Gracie Irene Whitaker in 1920. Henry had 7 with his wife Sally, including John Emery Whitaker, who was born in 1913. John Emery and Gracie married in 1935 and had 15 descendants. The couple were double cousins, sharing both sets of grandparents, and their offspring suffered severe physical and mental defects, suspected to be, because of inbreeding. A family member said they understand what you're talking about, if you try to talk to them, and if they don't like it, they start yelling. Well, I think I know where VC Andrews got her inspiration for a lot of her writing.
Number 10. Capture over choice. Consent is my favorite word. It really is, because it's important. But back in ancient times, wasn't really a word anyone really understood. Thousands of years ago, couples skipped right over dating and instead went from captured to married. In fact, it was this idea that kind of sparked the origin of the honeymoon. A bride would be captured from a tribe, the tribe would go looking for her, and the thief would hide her away until they stopped. If you have watched the Spartan video on Bumblebee, if you haven't, go check it out, then you may know that their marriage ceremony centered on this as well, kind of sorta, but consent was involved. As a way of courting, the women would wrestle to demonstrate their physical prowess, and vice versa. They would watch the men as well, and they would kind of simultaneously be like, yep, you. Then the woman's head would be shorn, they would dress them as a boy, and then they would be placed in a dark room and then wait for their betrothed to capture them and take them away. So very confusing there. I don't really understand it. But anyways, let's move on. Number 9, love letters. So nice. Today, it's easy to send a saucy text and an explicit pic to your partner, or fling, or a person you're just friends with, but you know. Or the person you've been seeing for like half a year, but they're not your BF or GF, like no. Anyways, the rules are up in the air, but back then you had to wait with bated breath to receive a thought-out letter from your lover, filled with poetry and extravagant flirtations and little drawings. There are love notes between Anne Boleyn and Henry VIII. Henry even drew little doodles of a man depicted in lovesick sorrows. Anne then wrote back with drawings showing her talking to the angel Gabriel, being like, oh yeah, I'm gonna get a son. The Tudor version of the emoji. One of their exchanges went, and I quote, "If you remember my love in your prayers as strongly as I adore you, I shall scarcely be forgotten, for I am yours, Henry Rex forever." And then Anne's response was, "Be daily prove you shall me find, to be to you both loving and kind." And then he cut her head off. How quickly the milk turned sour. But it was the way to play back then, and soon you'd have stacks of letters with declarations of love as you're heading to the chopping block with the guy beside you. Awful way to go. Awful way to go. Henry, you suck. Number 8. Escort cards. Today, someone might ask you for you to give them your number so they can text you up at like 3 AM. No, you're not. You're asleep because you have to work the next day. If you lived in the Victorian era, you may have dropped a calling card instead, or an escort card. Want to go on a date? Here's my card. It doesn't sound so romantic, but social calling cards didn't have your usual brick printing and beige background. Social calling cards were lavish, enticing, elegant, with bright colors and lush paper. If a man wanted to court a woman, he would hand her his calling card, which would not only include his name, but compliments to her. Kind of like a Valentine's Day card, but every day of the year. If a woman was the bee's knees and she was unmarried, she'd often return home with stacks of them. If she was particularly fond of one of them, she might take up the offer presented with the card, the offer of escorting a woman to and from a future social gathering. She would send her servant to deliver the news with her own calling card in response. This process was repeated several times and either amounted to something steady or flittered out. We all know what a ghosted text feels like, so I imagine this would be kind of the same. Number 7. Knives. Huh? If someone ever hands you a knife outside of lending it to you to eat your lunch, be wary, they may be trying to court you. In some Nordic countries, some courtship rituals involved knives. In Finland, for example, when a girl came of age to start courting, her father would give her an empty sheath to wear. It would be attached to her girdle, and when a suitor liked her, he would put his knife in her sheath. If the girl was interested, she would keep it. If not, she would give it back. Good old non-verbal communication. No. But also imagine putting a knife into the hand of someone you just denied. Ugh. If she kept it, this was also a signal to other suitors that she was taken and not interested in pursuing others. The idea of giving a woman a token of affection that she could use to signal her own interests is seen in many cultures, such as... what's next? Number 6. Spoons! We talked about knives that fit their sheaths, now let's talk about spoons. Spoons? Dating back all the way to 17th century Wales, suitors would give ornately carved love spoons. They would make it from a single piece of wood to show his affection to his intended. On the spoon, there would be engravings which would symbolize intention, i.e. an anchor, for instance, would mean I desire to settle down, and the vine would mean something like love grows. Rural peasants used wooden spoons to eat and prepare food, so carving spoons to use every day was a usual chore. The most beautiful spoons were kept therefore to keep as gifts, to give to those you loved or wanted to. The better the spoon, the finer the details, the finer the craftsman, the better the husband, which signaled to the love interest that they were reliable and skilled. The tradition is not specifically unique to Wales, in fact it happened in many Celtic countries. Number 5. Dating and dangerous. So fun fact, after the Victorian era, slash kinda during, going on dates was scandalous, like pretty kinda ooh. The term date is a relatively new term. It was coined just before the turn of the century. George Add wrote in the Chicago Record about young women filling up the dates in their calendar with rendezvous with young men, and that was in 1896. In the 1900s it took a little bit of adjusting. This therefore set the term kinda date as women going on dates. In the 1900s this took a little bit of adjusting. A woman out alone with a man without a chaperone at night and not a courtesan? How scandalous! As more and more women started doing it, people weren't sure how to react. Law enforcement even got involved because they would see a woman alone with a man and be like, she's a woman of the night, and then they'd arrest her, or they would be confused. But either way, in the eyes of the law, dating kind of became a crime. Women making a date seemed like they were pulling something else, so sometimes it was illegal to date, though other times it was like, dude, just stop, we're trying to go get dinner. Leave us alone. Number 4. The art of the fan. Ooh. Being entirely open about who you were pursuing could raise a lot of eyebrows and damage one's reputation, so nobles often had to code their advances behind the art of the fan, mostly women, actually all women. If you have ever seen Dangerous Liaisons, you may have noticed Glenn Close elegantly using her fan to seduce and manipulate gentlemen callers around her finger. And that really how it was. It was all a game only the cleverest suitors could decode. Carrying it in the right hand in front of your face? Follow me. Placing it on the left ear? I wish to get rid of you. With the handle to the lips? Kiss me. A society lady in the 18th century was expected to know how to elegantly handle and hold a fan. This also helped differentiate between social classes. So not only was it used to set up a secret meeting in the garden with your betrothed lover, it was also used to communicate gossip and information. Number 3. Classified ads. Today we have so many dating apps, it's dizzying. You can swipe left, you can swipe right for your dream beau, any which way you like. Hinge, Tinder, Bumble, is that all there is? Plenty of fish, I don't know. It may surprise you to learn that this wasn't the first time people tried it this way. Enter classified ads. Or personalized ads. If you were desperate for love and knew your person was out there but you just hadn't run into them yet, you would make an ad. In 1722, a Bostonian took space in the New England Current to put out an ad for, and I quote, "Any young gentlewoman that is minded to dispose of herself in marriage to a well-accomplished young widower and has £500 or £600 to secure to him by deed of gift, she may repair to the sign of the Glass Lanthorn in Steeple Square to find all the encouragement she can reasonably desire." End unquote. It was written by a 16-year-old Benjamin Franklin. Aw, bless. Some would even put out ads that captured the attention of someone they saw in passing. Take for instance this 1748 printing calling for, and I quote, "A lady genteelly dressed. This is to acquaint her that if she is disengaged and inclinable to marry a gentleman who was on that occasion is desirous of making honorable proposals." So cute. And now we know that all those dating apps were just a matter of time. Number 2. Wedding ceremonies. Okay, so I can't think of anything I would like least in the world than to have an entire room full of guests during one of the most private moments in anyone's life, especially my parents. Now, first comes dating, or courting as it were, then comes marriage slash sometimes they would just skip over dating and just go right to an arranged marriage, especially if you were a noble. And then for a long time comes your aunts, uncles, and parents into the bedding chamber to watch the consummation. Yay! A crowd of people would be there up until the very last second when the curtains were drawn, cheering you on. Some would even offer advice like, don't do that, do this. Some even stayed well past. For instance, on the wedding night of the young King Louis XIII and Anne of Austria, they had 2 nurses in attendance to make sure the ordeal went down. But this wasn't just in Europe, this also happened in China in the early 1900s. Number 1. bundling. Probably one of the most awkward ceremonies ever to take place, except for that one. That's the worst. But this is specifically to do with before getting married. As we have gathered thus far, being young and in love, or just being in love in general, has never been too easy. Bundling was a way to make it easier, I guess. I don't know. This 17th century tradition involved having your beau invited over. The parents needed to approve it, of course, and then you were to spend the night sleeping next to each other, bundled up to the neck or sometimes just the waist, like in like a human sack, and then you would sleep next to each other with a plank of wood in the middle. So romantic. The tradition was meant as a way to gauge chemistry between the two lovebirds. The two would get to know each other by talking and sleeping together only before engaging in marriage. If it didn't go well, then they wouldn't get married. If it did go well, so much so that they unwrapped each other like Christmas presents on Christmas morning, then they pretty much got married like as soon as possible. The tradition was pretty popular in Ireland, the Royal United Kingdom, and the New England colonies from 16th century into the 18th, but a lot of Victorian ideals were completely against it. They were like, no! Corset it up and no love. Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Murdochs. With the high profile of this ongoing case, coupled with the fact that Netflix just released a chilling documentary about the story of this family, it is likely that you may already have quite the idea of who the Murdoch family is. Taylor and I have been watching the documentary series. We're past the first few episodes, and man, is this story wild. A few years ago, if someone asked you who the Murdoch family was, you would have likely described them as one of the most powerful families in South Carolina, with a legal dynasty that has spanned for a century. Now, if I asked you that same question, the answer would be a family who had it all. Money, power, status, but some of the members flew a little too close to the sun, tragedy ensued, and now people have lost their lives and the family has been destroyed. It started back in 2015 with the death of Stephen Smith. It carries on to 2018 when Gloria Satterfield, a long-serving employee for the family, was found passed away after a quote trip and fall accident. These events are both horrible and completely atrocious, but despite the rumors, mysteries, and alleged conspirators of these deaths, things really started to unravel for the family in February of 2019 with the death of Mallory Beach. The young woman met her untimely fate after a boating accident where, allegedly, 19-year-old Paul Murdoch was at the wheel, intoxicated. We could spend hours and hours talking about this family and all of these cases and the conspiracies, but we're short for time, which brings me right to the most recent tragedy. The 2021 killings of that same Murdoch who was driving the boat, as well as the killing of his mother, Margaret. Now, I do believe that people are innocent until proven guilty, but it is important to note that the one on trial for these killings right now is the father and husband to the deceased, Alex Murdoch, the patriarch of the family who is supposed to be carrying on that Murdoch legacy. The stories surrounding this family are horrific, tragic, and a reminder of the dangers that money and power can bring. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Sacklers. This family is the one behind the dynasty of Purdue Pharma, who is best known for producing an exceptionally strong prescription painkiller. Of course, we all know just how big and rich a pharmaceutical company could get, especially one that has been around for quite some time. The company was first created in 1952 by 3 Brooklyn-born brothers, and in the beginning, the company mostly dealt in things like laxatives and earwax removal methods. Soon, things for the company took quite an upwards turn, and before anyone knew it, the family was regarded as one of the most esteemed New York families, but they were also known for their philanthropic tendencies, with their names on museums and hospitals, some of the most famous in the world. You see, the thing is, when they released this painkiller in 1995, it led to them amassing an insane $13 billion fortune. That is obviously incredible, but the trouble came when it was realized that this painkiller wasn't nearly as potent as it was marketed to be, and frequent users would be building up a tolerance to it, meaning they needed to use higher and higher dosages. Viewer, welcome to the opioid crisis. Basically, this all spiraled out of control and led to many lawsuits coming against Purdue Pharma. Not only by individuals, but by January 2019, 36 states were suing the company for what the painkiller had done to their citizens. After 2 years of deliberations, the Sacklers finally reached a deal with plaintiffs in bankruptcy court in September of 2021. As part of their Chapter 11 proposal, they agreed to pay $4.5 billion and give up all ownership of the company in exchange for complete immunity in all future opioid liability. Despite this fall from grace, the Sacklers were able to move an alleged $1.36 billion into offshore accounts, so despite their bankruptcy filing and the large sum of money handed over, they will continue to retain quite a large amount of their personal wealth. In our number 8 spot today, we have the Bakers. Jim and Tammy Faye Baker were once the most famous televangelists in America, and they certainly were living in quite a lap of luxury. They had beautiful homes, expensive cars, and a ton of money, but that quickly came crashing down amid horrendous scandal. In the late 1980s, after much success, Jim Baker resigned from the PTL ministry after there was a cover-up to hide some hush money that had been given to church secretary Jessica Hahn over an alleged SA situation. Of course, not necessarily a surprise, but definitely not a good look for a televangelist. This led to more interest in people looking into the family more, and soon it was uncovered that there was some sort of accounting fraud going on as well. The consequences for this came by way of felony charges, conviction, imprisonment, and divorce. That was the end of that legacy, but since serving his time, Jim Baker hasn't exactly slowed down. He not only remarried and returned to televangelism, but he also currently hosts The Jim Baker Show, which focuses on the end times and the second coming of Christ while promoting emergency survival products. So, that's interesting. In our number 7 spot today, we have Prince Sado. Born in 1735, Prince Sado was the heir to the Korean throne, but unfortunately, he would go on to suffer from extreme mental illness and delusions. Thankfully for historians and those of us interested in history, the wife of the prince created memoirs, and in them she detailed the horrifying things that happened next. The prince began to kill. He began to hurt and torment people. He basically turned their home into a house of horrors. The prince also endured some pretty horrific treatment from his own father, which of course is not an excuse for the things he did, but it definitely did not help the scenario. Eventually, the family had enough and realized that his behavior would go on to ruin the name of their family forever, so something needed to be done. At the time, tradition stated that if the prince were to be executed, his wife and child would also need to be, but everyone thought that maybe that was a bit too far. Why should they have to pay for his crimes? This led to the king coming up with quite the bizarre workaround for this. On a hot day in July, the king forced the prince to step into a rice chest, which was then locked behind him. This acted as a way to make it seem like he had caused his own death, which is said to have occurred just a few days later. In our number 6 spot today, we have Don Carlos. This little troublemaker never made it to the title of king, but he sure was a little too close for comfort when you hear about the kinds of things he was doing. Carlos was the Prince of Asturias in the mid-1500s, as he was the eldest son of King Philip II of Spain. It is said that Carlos may have had some troubles right from birth, which many believe could be due to inbreeding that was common in the family at the time. Descriptions of his behaviors, though, are far worse than what anyone could have expected. It is said that Carlos did horrible things like hurting or taking the lives of animals for fun. Nowadays, we call that a huge warning sign for potential killers. Back then, it was like, I don't know. Was anybody even watching you, really? It is even said that at one point he purposefully blinded all of the horses in the royal stable. Soon, of course, his cruelties would extend to humans, with people claiming that one time he chose to harm a servant girl for no reason other than because he could. Major King Joffrey vibes in that one. And apparently one time he made a shoemaker eat a pair of shoes that he had made that the prince didn't like. He was just a little twerp. Carlos was set up by his family to marry the eldest daughter of King Henry II, but after a few hours with the man, she decided that there was absolutely no way in hell. Like, he was so bad that she would rather marry his dad. Which she did in 1560. In the end, Carlos was found to be plotting to take out his own father, which landed him in prison in solitary confinement, where he passed away 6 months later. In our number 5 spot today, we have Prince John. It is said that this may be one of the darkest secrets of the British royal family. Prince John would have been the uncle of Queen Elizabeth II, but he passed before she was born. Prince John was the 6th child of King George V and Queen Mary, and it is said that he suffered from seizures, likely as a result of epilepsy, although it's hard to diagnose for certain because of all of the secrecies surrounding him and his illness. From the age of 4, when he had his first seizure, until his untimely and very early death, Prince John lived in a separate estate where he was cared for by a governess. Many people have since criticized the royal family, calling their treatment of Prince John as callous or inhumane, like they were hiding him away for being ill. Of course, the palace was concerned with the monarchy's public image, and there was a belief at the time that royals shouldn't have any physical or mental ailments, although That is of course impossible. They also didn't include him in public events, which could have been another image thing, and also perhaps because of a worry that he might have a seizure at one of these events. At the end of the day, it was definitely a different time, but the idea of excluding him because he was ill truly is a really sad thought. In our number 4 spot today, we have Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy. This is a royal scandal that took place all the way back in 1314, and it starts off with the daughters-in-law of King Philip IV of France. I think that's the 4th. Here's hoping. These young women, Marguerite and Blanche of Burgundy, were accused of having quite a scandalous affair with 2 brothers, Philippe and Gautier. So this already is some hot tea, but apparently when Queen Isabella of England, who is the daughter of King Philip of France, so I guess like sisters-in-law with these ladies, when she heard these stories, apparently she's the one who totally outed their affairs. It was obviously a huge deal, and both of the women admitted to their adultery. This led to them being pretty much erased from public knowledge. They had their hair cut short and they were thrown in a dungeon, and even though Marguerite was meant to be the Queen of France through her marriage, when her husband ascended the throne, she stayed locked in the dungeon until the marriage could be annulled. Little is known about what happened to either of them after this point. However, it is believed that Marguerite passed away in 1315 and Blanche 1326. As for the men in this affair, well, they met quite a gruesome fate that involved the removal of their bits and pieces before their swift execution. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Duggars. Alright, one of the most famous reality TV families, and even before the horrors of this family came to light, they were already a family that had fame due to quite a strange reason. If you're unfamiliar with who the Duggars are, you might be more familiar with the show that they used to have on TLC titled 19 Kids and Counting. Yeah, the show ran on TLC for 7 years until it was cancelled in 2015, and the show featured, well, the Duggar family. The family consisted of parents Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar and their 19 children, 9 daughters and 10 sons, all of whose names begin with the letter J. It was an interesting time, and they seemed like this huge, happy, religious family, but in the years since the cancellation of the show, some horrifying things came to light. Initially, the reason that TLC suspended and then subsequently cancelled the show is because it came to light that the eldest son in the family, Josh, had done some horrible things and acted violently, horrendously, and inexcusably against a number of girls, even some in his own family. Due to the popularity of the show before these serious stories came to light, there was a spin-off show that was created titled Counting On. This show first aired in December 2015 and stayed on the air for a surprising number of years before it was pulled, and the family yet again found themselves in the center of a scandal that had to do with Josh. This time he was caught in possession of a certain kind of tape that no one should have, and that should not even exist at all. I can't say which kind of tape, but just know it's the worst of the worst. These are, of course, some of the worst scandals that have surrounded the family, but truly, it's only a drop in the bucket of the many stories surrounding them. In our number 2 spot today, we have King Juan Carlos. The former King Juan Carlos of Spain, when he first ascended the throne in 1975, was highly looked upon. He was said to be bringing a new age for the country, an age of democracy. His reign lasted for quite a while, but by the time 2014 rolled around, he was forced to abdicate the throne. This was due to a few reasons. Firstly, his public ratings started to plummet after word spread of him being a bit of a womanizer and after an explosive affair, but also because of a lavish elephant hunting trip he took in the middle of an economic collapse. Okay, fair enough, I can see why people were getting their guard up a bit. So the king abdicated the throne in favor of his son Philippe, who sits on it to this day. During this time, however, the scandals in the family weren't only to do with Juan Carlos. In January of 2014, another of his children, his daughter Infanta Cristina, was charged with tax fraud. She has since been acquitted. That happened in 2017, but she was stripped of her title as the Duchess of Palma de Mallorca, and this whole deal had her leaving Spain and moving to Switzerland. The drama doesn't end here, however, because her husband actually was convicted in the case with charges that included embezzlement, fraud, and tax evasion, and he received prison time in 2018. In the end, none of the fraud charges have ever been linked back to the former king, but this entire debacle did cause the former ruler to move out of Spain. With his move came a letter, part of which read, quote, "Guided by the conviction to perform the best service to the Spanish people, their institutions, and you as king, I am communicating my thoughtful decision to move at this time outside of Spain. A decision I make with sadness, but with great serenity. I have been king of Spain for almost 40 years, and during all of them I have always wanted the best for Spain and for the crown." In our number 1 spot today, we have the Rothschilds. This family is easily one of the most, if not the most, powerful family in the modern era. In fact, it is said that most of us in the Western world don't even realize the impact this family has had on our lives, as our consumer-driven lifestyle is definitely directly related to the monetary systems this family put in place. This would include the United States Federal Reserve. Because of this insane amount of money and power that this family has held for over a century, there are plenty of conspiracy theories going on surrounding them. The conspiracies run deep, and they go quite dark. They touch on everything from assassination attempts, some successfully completed on sitting presidents, to heinous World War II agendas that would have benefited the family. Of course, they are conspiracies, so no one is quite sure which of these secrets, if any, are true. Even still, the stories and speculations swirl today, waiting for some piece of evidence to maybe bring them to light.
Alright, coming in at number 10, we've got Aristotle. You know, Aristotle has been considered to be one of the greatest thinkers and philosophers in history, but he was also a little scandalous with his thoughts too. At least by our modern standards. Turns out that Aristotle was quite the misogynist. He even wrote saying that, quote, a woman is perhaps an inferior being and that women were, quote, as it were a deformity, end quote. I mean, damn, Aristotle, have you seen a woman? Like, we're pretty awesome, you know, you're just jealous. But there's a bit of a bright side here though, because although Aristotle believed that women were inferior, he still believed that women needed to be part of society and that their happiness was a requirement for society to function effectively. Even though he did give us some credit for being a requirement for the success of society, he did kind of screw us over for millennia because his philosophy shaped a lot of how society viewed women. So yeah, thanks a lot, Aristotle. You really did a number there, didn't ya?
Number 9. Grover Cleveland. The 22nd and the 24th US president. He's the only president to leave after one term but then come back later on. There you go, change his mind. He was initially elected in 1885. Even back in those days, presidential scandals were underway. Grover was involved in a relationship with a younger woman named Maria Crofts Halpin, and then years later, Halpin came forward and said, surprise, you are the father. Cleveland sent child support, but he didn't fully admit it. He also didn't deny it either. He just kind of just stood there, just threw money and just didn't answer any questions. So when he ran for president in 1884, his rivals caught wind of this whole scandal, and instead of Twitter, not, existing and all, they had to resort to chants. Yeah, opponents would chant, Mama, where's Pa? Gone to the White House, ha ha ha. Now as far as chants go, that's pretty weak. The guy still won, so do a little bit better, it doesn't have a ring to it. Grover's sister though, Rose, she was the first lady to the now bachelor president until 1886, that's when he got married. Now at the same time, Rose Cleveland started to see a married woman named Evangeline Simpson. There were letters that surfaced afterwards where Evangeline referred to Rose as her everything. After Evangeline's husband died, the two finally got together and ran off to Italy. How romantic is that? Now compare that to some presidential scandals today. This sounds like a happy ending somewhat, but it gets a lot worse on this list.
Coming in at number 8, Franklin D. Roosevelt. If celebrity news has taught us anything, it's that marriage scandals are the most scandalous of them all. Everyone wants to gossip about that, so up next let's talk about Franklin D. Roosevelt and his great love affair. FDR was considered to be one of America's greatest presidents, leading the nation through the Great Depression and being the only president to serve for more than 2 terms. But even with all of this praise, we all know that everyone has their flaws, and FDR's flaw was that he couldn't keep his hands to himself, at least where his love life was concerned. It turns out that Roosevelt had a mistress for many years. This scandal first started in 1918 before he even became president. Roosevelt was married to his wife Eleanor, but was secretly seeing someone on the side, a woman named Lucy Mercer, whom FDR had hired to be his wife's secretary. Eleanor ended up finding a stash of love letters written between FDR and Lucy, and when she confronted her husband, she made him promise to never see her again and to sleep in separate beds from then on. This whole bed agreement didn't really last all that long, as FDR was able to finesse his way back into Eleanor's good books, but that wasn't all he was able to finesse. He was also able to get back with his mistress, who stayed by his side until his death in 1945.
Number 7. Spencer Tracy. When they were first introduced to each other on the set of Woman of the Year back in the early 40s, Katharine Hepburn found Spencer Tracy irresistible. Just simply irresistible, love at first sight. Their chemistry on and off screen, it was obvious. It shows in their work. It's not uncommon now for actors to fall in love on set. Sophia Bush and Chad Michael Murray, come on guys, love is obviously real. You can't help it sometimes. The sad reality was that Spencer Tracy was a married man at the time. He was married to Louise Treadwell, and they got married way earlier in 1923. So at that point, sadly, they were having marital issues. But because of Spencer's Catholic background, he didn't believe in divorce, so they had to stay married. And they began to live separately, and then Spencer and Hepburn began their lifelong relationship until Tracy's death later on in 1967. This was always an odd one to me, because it's like divorce is a no-go, but cheating and then lying about it to friends, family, and coworkers, I mean, the Lord works in mysterious ways, I guess. I don't know.
Coming in at number 6, Peter the Great. You know, he may be called Peter the Great, but after hearing about the seriously messed up thing he did, you'll probably end up thinking to yourself, you know, maybe he's not so great after all. Peter the Great was the emperor of Russia in the 17th century, and he did a lot to bring his people into more modern times to keep up with the rest of the Western world, but he was also kind of a He was known to grab the bosoms of his wife's ladies-in-waiting, even when his wife was in the room. He was also known to have had many mistresses and was deeply submerged in double standards. You see, to him, he could sleep with as many people as he pleased, but when his wife got herself a little boo thing on the side, Peter was just not cool with it. When he found out that his wife Catherine I had a sneaky link, Peter came up with some bogus criminal charge to put against his wife's side piece and had him executed. Now you might think, yeah, that's pretty scandalous and messed up. But wait, there's more! On top of having Catherine's secret lover executed, he had the guy's head removed, placed in a jar, and put it in Catherine's room so that she would have to A, be traumatized, and B, have a reminder of her betrayal. That's seriously messed up, so again, Peter the Great, not as great as you think.
Number 5, Marlin Brando. Rita Moreno and Marlon Brando never got married, but the two are remembered for their roller coaster of a relationship. They lasted for 8 years after meeting on the set of the 1954 film Desire. Rita was 22, and the Puerto Rican-born American icon even got an EGOT. She got an Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and a Tony. Insanely talented. Now Brando, of course, went on to do a couple of those, student films, something about a streetcar and a godparent of some sorts. The 4th greatest male movie star, surprise surprise, pursued other women at the same time. He married Anna Cashby in 1957 and then Movida Castaneda in 1960. He had children with both of them, all the while Brando was still pursuing a relationship with Rita. Now she once wrote, "He broke my heart and came close to crushing my very spirit with his physical infidelities and worse, with his emotional betrayals." Rita even attempted to take her own life. That's how much pain she was in with Brando in this relationship. "We were obsessed with each other," she says, "but I couldn't take the humiliation of him being with other women." Brando ended up helping her with therapy down the road, and until the end of Brando's life they remained friends, still in touch. He did the calling though. She never called him first after that point, which is nice to know.
At number 4, Caravaggio. You may know Caravaggio as the famed painter from the 16th and 17th centuries, but apparently he was much more than just an artiste. Caravaggio was a lot more scandalous than you might think, because during his life he got into a lot of trouble with the law, the worst of it coming from when he actually just murked somebody. The artist was someone who was known to spend his long, lonely evenings in the comfort of a lady of the night, and apparently this comfort was just enough justification to end someone, because when the employer, I guess you could say, wanted to sleep with this lady of the night, Caravaggio went full beast mode and eliminated his competition. But he really said, hands off the merchandise, right? The way he went about offing his competition was pretty brutal. Because of the NSFW nature of this feud, the artist went to relieve his opponent of his manhood, but since Caravaggio was an artist and not a doctor, he didn't really know what he was doing and things went pretty left. The artist didn't intend to kill the other guy, but he accidentally ended up severing the man's artery and he died. The artist later fled to a small town to escape the scandal and the authorities and remained in hiding until he died.
Number 3, Carrie Grant. Another couple that met on set, another rocky road of relationship. When Sophia Loren and Cary Grant worked together on The Pride and the Passion in 1957, Cary made Sophia the lead of his next film in 1958 called Houseboat. Now, this isn't really uncommon per se. Directors like to recast. Christopher Nolan has used the same people in like 6 of his movies. It's really confusing actually. Thing is, Cary Grant had a wife at the time, and she also wrote the original script for that film. Now we got a scandal. His wife was actress Betsy Drake. Originally, Betsy was the lead alongside her husband, every theater kid's dream essentially. But Cary Grant got a new script in the works that cut his wife out of the film entirely. Roasted. Sophia Loren was also in a relationship at the time, so it was just all bad. She was supposed to marry Carlo Ponti, but because of those pesky Catholic laws that I mentioned earlier, he couldn't get a divorce from his wife. So she was in a rough spot for a while before deciding ultimately on Carlo that he was the best for her. Cary Grant really didn't help anybody at all. The guy got a new script, then cut his wife. That's ruthless. Imagine cutting your own wife.
At number 2, Voltaire. When I was in school, we learned about the French author Voltaire. If you ever had to read his book Candide, I'm so sorry. But I'm even more sorry to have to tell you this, but Voltaire was a horrible guy. His thoughts about a certain group of people were quite horrible, and I guess you could say it was pretty scandalous. It turns out that the author was quite critical of people of Jewish faith. As he was raised as a Jesuit, he harbored a lot of animosity towards Jewish people, and as an author does, he didn't hold back from talking about his feelings towards them. When referring to Jewish people, Voltaire once said that they, quote, were as adept in turning fables into history as they were turning second-hand clothes into new ones, end quote. I don't think I could ever see Voltaire the same way again, but then again, I really hated Candide, so I don't know.
And finally, coming in number 1, Frank Sinatra. The 1940s icon died in 1998, but in 2011, Harry Connick Jr. came forward about the inappropriate behavior Frank had with his wife Jill. Harry performed in front of Frank in 1994, but he bombed the show. His nerves caught up, he froze, it happens. Now when Harry and Jill were leaving, on the way out they bumped into Sinatra on the elevator. Connick felt embarrassed for bombing, he apologized, said he's usually a lot better, that he deserved to see better. Sinatra didn't even say a word, he just grabbed Jill, kissed her, and then left. Yeah, there's a few words for that, that's not allowed here, or ever for that matter. Doesn't matter what songs you did, just don't do that, that's gross. This isn't new though, sadly. In the late 30s, Sinatra was arrested, originally for seduction charges, but once it was revealed that she was married, the charges changed to adultery. When Sinatra was 50, he married Mia Farrow, who was 21 years old at the time, she was an actor, and Frank wanted her to give up acting, but after she went on to star in Rosemary's Baby, he divorced her after 2 years of marriage. Controlling asshole. The guy brought papers to her on set while she was working at her job. That's what he decided to do on his day off. Maybe he has a few classics, sure, but Frank Sinatra is not the gentleman some of you believe he is, that's for sure.
Number 10, Queen of the Nile. For me, it's fun to think about the day in the life of an ancient Roman or Egyptian. I can only hope it was as beautiful as textbooks, movies, and video games make it out to be. But something that I find interesting is that the Egyptians were using makeup all those years ago. Yes, that's right, Cleopatra, being the bougiest of all the queens to ever grace our presence, or at least so Elizabeth Taylor would make me think so, had her fair share of makeup use. However, something that may not be fit for a queen was the Egyptian eye glitter. Oh boy, here we go. To achieve this, colorful insect beetles were crushed up and added to an applicable powder, where you would then brush that on your eyes. Look, bugs don't gross me out, but I don't exactly know if I'd want that all up in my business. To be fair, we shouldn't be grossed out because, I hate to tell you, but there's some products we still use today that might have a cup or two of bugs in it, just saying. Number 9, Royal Bite. It would be difficult to specify a queen who had this done, as there are probably simply too many, and it's more of a, well, service I guess than a product, but hear me out. Something I'm just extremely fascinated in and frightened by at the same time, taking place in Africa, Asia, and the South Pacific Islands. Your dentist's worst nightmare. Teeth sharpening. Ooh. Considered to be a thing of beauty. Many women, and even recently, have undergone this process of jungle dentistry. I for one cannot judge someone else's culture. However, I can judge the experience of acquiring such a look. And I know that just can't be fun. You ever get a cavity removed at the dentist and buddies just drilling into your tooth like John D. Rockefeller looking for some oil? Okay, well imagine someone filing your teeth down like a high school woodshop project. Yeah, no thanks. I get shivers just thinking about it, and all that blood and the powdered teeth just piling up in your mouth, and there's no suction thingy? Nah, that's just the worst, man. Nah, that ain't it. I talked to the chief, he's a dentist. That ain't it. Number 8, shampoo. What's better than having a hot shower after a long day and just rinsing off the woes of the day? Honestly, it's one of my favorite things. For me, a nice hair wash feels good with my favorite shampoo, and because I'm a guy, my body wash, shampoo, and conditioner are all the same product. It's what we do. However, queens of the Inca civilization had more lucrative beauty products, to say the least. I say product because this was a process. What am I talking about? Fermented urine. What else, of course? Yes, that's right, the Incas' favorite way to combat those dry scalps was the forbidden lemonade. That's just gross, don't drink that. They would have clay pots filled with the golden broth, and then it was cast aside to really let those flavors come together. Or at least I think that's what's happening, that's something a chef would say. Anyway, once it reached the desired level of fermentation, it was then used to clean hair. Oh man, what a way to make a queen stay fresh. Just, message to the Incas, just stick to soap, man, don't do that. Imagine just like having it it feels so good. Oh, it smells great. I love this. This is fantastic. This is so great. I love this. Number 7, foundation. Sometimes all a girl or a queen needs is a little foundation. After all, who doesn't want to have a gorgeous glowing complexion? Especially if you're a queen. The royalty of ye olde Europe felt the same way, except their products were a little different than to what a queen would have today. Some products are hard to pitch and market, but this would be even hard to market in a Super Bowl commercial. The queens of ye olde Europe fell into a trend of having pale skin. So, to achieve this mixture, it was a mixture of lead and vinegar to coat the face that gave the desired pale look. That just sounds awful. Talk about scandalous. Our queen's makeup makes her smell like she's been working away in a lead mine all day. Naturally, this couldn't have been pleasant, but a girl's gotta do what a girl's gotta do. Beauty is pain, and sometimes it's really stinky. Number 6, Cowboy Action. Okay, not exactly a queen, but pretty close. Hear me out, guys. Sarah Winchester was the widow and the heiress of the Winchester rifle fortune. This included $20 million and 50% of shares of the company. Man, I wish that was me. And in case you didn't know, the Winchester Rifle Company was responsible for making guns good when a lot just weren't. And that model of rifle unfortunately took a lot of lives, so it's said that the Winchester mansion was haunted by the ghosts of the poor souls who found themselves at the business end of a repeater. Sarah allegedly was missing a few cards from the deck, all 6s and 9s, just a little crazy. So in her craziness, it's fair to say she spent some time with a Winchester rifle or two, which is quite a scandalous product for a queen who thinks she's seeing ghosts. Plus, women back then, besides Annie Oakley, weren't supposed to handle things like that because it was the 1800s and men were just really mean and stinky, and come on guys, give her a break. Ain't that woman can't shoot a gun? What are you talking about? Number 5, toxic eyes. It's no mystery that beauty products today can be filled with all kinds of lovely chemicals that make you look great. And there's tons of products from the past that could be labeled as scandalous. Well, how about putting literal poison in your eyes? Yes, that's right. Back to the women of ye olde Europe. The very same queens with the pale skin wanted eyes that sparkled. How to achieve this? Well, you just put drops of belladonna in your eyes, which, if you didn't know, is poison. Like just straight up poison. It's bad. It would dilute the eyes, and that was considered beautiful. If you think that sounds like it's bad for your health, that's because it is. Long-term exposure to the belladonna drops would lead to blindness. Yeah, kind of a trade-off there. Good looking eyes, go blind later. Yeah, no thanks. Number 4, the neck stretcher. No, that is not a WWE wrestler or finishing move, although it really sounds like one. It could be. No, this is something I've always been fascinated with, really. It's just kind of out of this world. I'm talking about neck rings from some African and Asian cultures. Basically, over there in some cultures, the more a woman looks like the Kaminoans from Attack of the Clones, the better. And that means it's time to stretch the neck by slowly placing rings around a young woman's neck until it grows. And then you keep slapping those bad boys on until you've got so many rings on your neck, it'll make you say Cypher Diaz. Had to fit a little Star Wars in there somewhere. Truth be told, the neck doesn't actually stretch. It's more the shoulders are dropping from all that weight, which can weigh up to like 15 pounds or something. It's crazy. And if common folk take part in this lengthy procedure, the most beautiful of queens certainly did too. Number 3, this makes no sense. Look, with all the crazy, super awful, weird things that humans have done, at least most of the time in my opinion, there's a method to the madness. Poisonous eye drops do make your eyes pretty, sure. The urine shampoo does get rid of my dandruff, okay. But with this one, I mean, there's just no way. It just doesn't make sense. And I would have no idea how to present this to royalty, especially the Queen of the Nile. Toothpaste made from mice, yes. Just how though? It doesn't make any sense. Like, how was a mouse supposed to make your breath feel fresh over some herbs and nicer smelling things? Basically, you cut the mouse in half, like that's a normal thing to do, and then you put that in your mouth. Also, have you ever tried catching a mouse? That's not easy. Is there a mouse farm? So many questions. To me, it's just a really bad look to have the queen swishing around half a mouse in her mouth like some of Listerine's finest mouthwash. Ugh. Number 2, blondes have more fun. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a popular hair color, and believe it or not, I used to have natural blonde hair, like super blonde. And then Harambe left this plane of existence and my hair got darker. Cause life got darker. Now all I want to do is listen to MCR in my room and write in my journal about how nobody understands me while MTV plays on the TV my parents bought me in the background. Some people want to go blonde. This was true of royal women in ye olde times. So time to reach for some good old-fashioned hair dye right off the shelf, right? Let's read the ingredients together. Water, oh, that's good, okay. I got water. Lead, well, I got tons of that on my face already, so that's fine. And was it sulfur? What? Yeah, that's right, that's sulfur. Imagine slathering that stinky goodness all in your locks. This was something that the highly esteemed Tudor women actually did, or at least tried. I feel like you need a whole truck of this stuff to work. But then again, the smell. That's not how a queen should smell, is it? It's not right now. You shouldn't. It's not. Number 1. The Canary Girls. When Great Britain was at war, the Queen was a symbol of their freedom and democracy. True British strength to keep on carrying on. So the next time the Queen goes to visit a munitions factory to cheer on the women who are working hard day and night for the war effort, she might want to keep her distance. The high explosives used in the artillery shells, famously known as TNT, I'd break down the scientific name, but we all know my track record with reading. I can't. It is a very volatile substance, but not just for the explosive capabilities, but it's also toxic. Yeah, I didn't know this. I learned this. Very similar to the radium girls of the same fate. TNT with enough exposure can turn skin and hair a yellowy orange color. Now, we can't have Her Royal Majesty showing up somewhere looking like Big Bird, can we? To avoid being a literal blonde bombshell, perhaps stay away from the factory, Your Royal Highness. Number 10. The classic. Alexander the Great is probably the most infamous person on this list. Shout out again to my late 90s PC gamers, but because of Age of Empires and Civilization games, you are probably familiar with old Alexander, one of the great conquerors of ancient times. So what does that mean exactly? Well, the man wasn't asking for land with please and thank you. He was asking with a spear and a shield, sort of style. And by asking, I mean just taking. However, for the brutal, handsome young king of many lands, his time to bask in his empire was short-lived, as he died soon after Persia was conquered. His achievements cannot be understated, however. Conquering so much at such a young age was very impressive, comparative to the mythological Achilles in grandeur. Number 9. A man in his barrel. This is going to be very difficult to talk about, simply because I find the premise of this to be comedy gold. Okay, close your eyes. Imagine ancient Greece. A city like Athens is populated with the wealthy in gowns and robes, and maybe even a stereotypical toga. Buildings of white stone and marble. A market bustling with people haggling for fresh produce and cloth. Perhaps even a fountain with some flowers. Beautiful, isn't it? However, just around the corner, not too far from the town square, there's a barrel. A barrel that's shaking vigorously. And what is causing this barrel to shake? Well, that would be the man who lives in it, Diogenes. Yes, a philosopher who was self-gratifying himself in a barrel in public. Diogenes defended his behavior by saying how he wished it was as easy to relieve hunger by rubbing an empty stomach. Yeah, I was sitting in my study earlier when a courier handed me a letter. I opened the letter in a warm candlelight glow. It was from the chief. And he said that's not it. Number 8, trendsetter. As if doing what Diogenes did in public wasn't bad enough, and I mean, come on, that's pretty scandalous, he also would commonly defecate in public theaters and urinate on those he found annoying. Sure, maybe major cities need people like this. I mean, come on, would New York City really be New York City if crazy people don't yell at you on the streets all the time? Huh? Diogenes just may have been the first to do such crazy things. Also, I'd like to argue his philosophy. If you just give me a moment, if he pees on people who are annoying him, could the people that are being peed on not deem that annoying and then do the same in return? I'm not a smart guy like the Greek leaders, but at least I know how to use a washroom. Just saying. Number 7, high fashion. I say if you got it, flaunt it. Humbly, of course. Maybe a nice pair of shoes, your favorite pants, or for me, a brand new suit that makes me feel gorgeous, baby, yeah. But for the most part, I shop at Walmart. Let's be honest, I don't have that kind of money for the Gucci flip-flops down to the socks. However, for the great Greek philosophers like Socrates, they were wealthy enough to enjoy a literal finer cut of cloth. Yes, they could, but Socrates said no. I want the peasant look, please. Apparently, the wise Greek man often didn't wear shoes and always wore the same ratty coat. It's also said that Socrates wasn't exactly a good looker. Put on some shoes though, that'd be rough. You're walking around all day with no shoes on? Oh, those would be rough looking feet, buddy. Number 6, smart streaker. Anyone that's ever spent time with a physics professor has probably heard the story 100 times, and that professor probably genuinely thinks this is a funny story. Archimedes, the famed Greek philosopher, made a strange discovery. Strangely, one night after a long day of hard thinking, he went to take a bath. Pondering the questions of life, he noticed something was happening in the tub. No, not his rubber ducky going missing, but rather a simple yet interesting concept of displacement. When he was submerged in the water rose. He deducted that if he measures the difference, that would equal his weight of volume. And if it works with an old man, then it would work with other things as well. He was so excited by this that he shot up and ran outside screaming, "Eureka! Eureka!" Well, that part may not have happened, but if it did, I'd hate to be his neighbor. No one wants to see that, man. Number 5. I had the high ground, Anakin. According to a disputable legend, however, given my semi-okay Palpatine impression, I had to include this on the list. Basically, Mdocles was a smart dude and had just earned himself a decent track record. He helped save people. Dude was credible. He gained somewhat of a following afterwards, almost to the point of worship. This may have gone to his head as he started to believe his own divineness and jumped into an active volcano, where strangely enough, he does not come out of it. Now I wonder what would have caused that to happen. Perhaps maybe he didn't have a certain galactic friend who was the Senate, the whole Senate and nothing but the Senate, and could shoot lightning out of his fingertips and help out someone of the burning lava, yes. Number 4. Manure burial. Heraclitus had edema, which is basically some bloating in the hands and feet due to excess water and fluids in the body. Not a big deal. Although, sometimes in ancient times, all diseases were serious because, well, in ancient times, frankly, a papyrus cut could be the difference between you attending the next celebration of town or taking a cruise down the river Styx. Heraclitus had a solution for this. As a learned man, he was never wrong. So what was his scientific medical solution to his ailment that might have gone away on its own? Well, he basically buried himself in manure so it would get rid of the excess water in his body. Yeah, I don't know how that works either. Unfortunately, he was attacked and eaten by wild dogs in his mud bath. He did not make it out. Number 3. Boys Club. Hypatia was a female philosopher at the Library of Alexandria, something that any archaeologist or historian would give their right kidney to witness in its glory. What's so scandalous about her, besides being a woman with knowledge that would scare a lot of men at the time? Things were alright until a Christian mob discovered she was a pagan. Well, this certainly could not stand, and in probably the weirdest assassination attempt ever, she was unalived by being sliced with clamshells. Or roof tiles. The translation gets a little lost. Regardless, we're not playing Clue here, so it doesn't matter if the Christian mob uses the shells in the library or not. The fact is, an intelligent woman who taught others was removed for no good reason. Number 2. Countrymen, lend me your ears. Zeno of Elea was a learned man, and in a rebellion against his leader Nearchus, he was captured and received the beating only a stepson would know. However, in Zenos' final act of defense, he asked Nearchus to come close so that he could whisper in his ear. And channeling his inner Mike Tyson, reeled back his head and came in to take a bite out of his ear like Scruff McGruff the dog takes a bite out of crime. Sure, he was victorious, but history tends to remember things like that. You got a page in a textbook somewhere, Zeno. Number 1. Zeus. Does this man deserve an introduction? Here's another topic that could honestly be its own video. Zeus, the god of gods, the man with all the power and the affinity for tossing lightning bolts the same way Gordon Ramsay tosses salads. But I'll just write them off for you. Turned his first wife into a fly and ate her. Constantly unfaithful to his other wives. Tied Prometheus to a rock and had his liver eaten by a bird. Wiped out humanity. Cursed a man to push a boulder up a steep hill for eternity. And made Atlas put the world on his shoulders. Shout out to my people in the audience who get anxiety trying to order a pizza over the phone. Now imagine you have to literally hold the whole world on your shoulders. Oh, too much pressure. Yes, I know Zeus is mythological, but a lot of others on this could be as well. This was a long time ago. Some documents just didn't live that long. Number 10. The blade, the wife, and the horse? If you love something, you gotta let it go. Or how about parading your naked wife in front of your friends in the mighty Roman military? Emperor Caligula was so impressed with his wife's beauty, he just thought he had to share it. even though apparently she wasn't that attractive, and already had children with another man. Scandalous. If she had wheels, she'd be the town bike, if you know what I'm saying. As if displaying your wife's gratuitous curves isn't scandalous enough, apparently he would use very real threats as a strange way of flirting. Clearly this was a dude who's got some issues. Like for example, the one time he wanted to humiliate the Roman Senate by claiming to make his horse a consul. Although he didn't actually go through with it. Still though, this one's all 6s and 9s, innit? This may have been related to a brothel caught disease. He might have had syphilis, I'm just saying. Number 9. No grain. Max Minimus Thrax was like most Roman emperors. Seized power when he wanted, seized land when he wanted, pretty much did whatever he wanted. Strangely enough, however, he cut subsidies for grain. This was one of the many tactics to help up cover for increased taxes. Taxes that were imposed because he had doubled the pay of the military during constant military action. That's a lot of coins needed. Eventually the people had had enough. And ironically, his own guards poked him with spears until he couldn't be poked anymore. I'm not a military expert or anything, but if you're gonna wage war, you gotta have the money for it. It's kind of like when the ice cream truck comes around and you're counting quarters for a large chocolate cone because you're 12 and life is hard and you deserve it. I love the ice cream truck. Number 8. Red Roman. Emperor Caracalla was also like many other Roman emperors, as he was quite bloodthirsty, and honestly just a bad dude. He unalived his brother Gaeta just because he didn't like him. Good reason, I guess. Then 20,000 of his brother's followers persecuted and killed. When some good folks heard about this terrible news, and were horrified, rightfully so, I mean who wouldn't be, they too were dealt with in a non-YouTube conduct safe way. He depleted the treasury from war and let foreigners have Roman citizenship. Now I know that sounds like a good thing, but it isn't. In already trying times, it completely messed up Roman societal culture. In a sense, fire is good. It allows us many things. But Caracalla threw a whole jerry can of gasoline on the fire by doing that. When your society is built on one thing, perhaps it's a good idea to not totally flip that upside down overnight, as quick decisions like that lead to quick downfalls. Just saying though, just saying. Number 7. The light of my life. Emperor Nero was straight up just not a cool guy. This whole list could be about him, but I'm here to make you laugh, not horrify you with the horrors of Pax Romana. Nero, like most emperors, was very wealthy, the kind of wealth that only people who shop at Whole Foods can understand. As it turns out, there was a fire in Rome at the time. Burned for a long time, pretty big deal. Who started the fire? No one really knows, even though Nero himself might be a suspect. However, it would be really easy to get rid of a group of people you don't like if you blame it on them. So it was blamed on the hot new religion at the time, you gotta love them, Christians, except Nero didn't, and he was kind of egotistical, so in order to punish the scapegoated Christians, he had them set ablaze. So there was more light in his garden, so to speak, or that's what is said, at least. I know sometimes we can all disagree with our faith, but lighting each other on fire is not the answer. Mom always said if you have nothing nice to say, then don't light people on fire. Okay, Mom. Number 6. Not so Hercules. Commodus was like many other emperors in thinking that he was very close to the gods, but Commodus thought he was a Greek god, and reincarnated Hercules to be exact. So much so that he would often take up a role as a gladiator, which a lot of Romans thought was scandalous as a leader. A leader shouldn't be dealing with the barbarians at our gates and other lands that were persecuting and invading and taking over, rather than performing in blood sports. It was thought that this was below the office of the emperor. Rumors began to stir that because of his love for the arena, he may not be the royal bloodline claimed to be. When in the arena, his adversaries always surrendered, so he always won. In return, he wouldn't kill them, to be fair, just scarred them, as it was seen to be a good thing to be bested by the emperor and then to leave with a mark. Sure, we'll go with that. Apparently, they also brought animals in for him to slaughter in the arena for entertainment. Eventually, people had enough of him wasting time and money playing gladiator games, and he was strangled by his coach. Oh, hey coach, I'm ready for the next match, how you doing? Hey, why are you looking at me like that, man? What's wrong? And what's that rope for? Number 5. Last best hope. Romulus Augustulus was the last emperor of the Western Roman Empire. History gets kind of crazy after this point, but let's be real, what's more scandalous than being the last ruler of your empire? Could he have saved it? Would the world have looked different if he did? Truth be told, not a lot of records survived his reign, so we don't really know. Perhaps it's because he didn't have much time to write things down. Or maybe because he was still a minor when he inherited the failing Roman Empire. Or really it was because Rome's worst nightmare had come true. The barbarians at the gates had taken over Rome. The German barbarian general Odoacer took over and claimed himself to be the king of Italy, which ushered in the end of the Great Western Roman Empire. Talk about scandal. Number 4. Excess, excess, excess. Emperor Elagabalus is what I think of when I think of a Roman emperor. Someone who is pampered in a time where most people don't have access to really anything easily. Eating grapes off the vine, bottles of wine, and your servants are looking fine. Alright, alright, alright. His life of decadence was also matched with the classic level of unaliving those who oppose you, or rather groups that you feel need to be persecuted. Even more scandalous than that is the question of his sexuality. Oh. While being debated by historians today, there are rumors that the decadent emperor may have been having a relationship with his male chariot driver. There's also rumors of the emperor wearing women's clothes. Very scandalous indeed, oh handsome emperor. Number 3. Senate Purge. I am the Senate, said Tiberius, knowing that he had a really cool name. While not the worst emperor on this list, he did purge the Senate in times of political unrest, just like everyone's favorite space emperor and one of my worst impressions. He wasn't a popular choice for the job, as he really only came to power through a series of misfortunes. All of this leads to a lackluster leader who, when he retired to an island off the coast of Italy, rewarded his mediocre work with some stuff to do with younger people that I just can't say on YouTube. Apparently, he became a heavy drinker and got himself involved in all kinds of vices. It is speculated that Emperor Caligula was a child on this island and may have witnessed this debauchery. It's speculated that this may have influenced his acts of sin, and honestly not sure what to call, as these guys are, I don't know what you call this, these guys are all messed up, man, I don't know, they're just crazy. Number 2, no holidays. Septimus Severus sounds like a brothel related disease in the Harry Potter universe. But actually, he was a traditional guy. He liked things Roman and wanted to keep it that way. So, when the Jewish and Christian faith made their way to Rome, he wasn't a happy guy. So he had them persecuted. The only thing saving these people from a short Roman sword was if they worshipped the emperor and the emperor gods as well. For some reason, that made him a little more forgiving. However, considering he wasn't the only emperor to feel this way, I would think again before decorating a Christmas tree or lighting a menorah in Rome. Of course, I'm only making humor of what probably was an awful time for those religious factions. We like to romanticize Rome, but she's not all perfect. Number 1, eye for an eye. Empress Irene of the Eastern Roman Empire may have been a woman, but was just as ruthless and bloodthirsty as her male counterparts. While a lot of people probably had an issue with her leading as a woman, I'd like to hope more people today have a problem with her politics and how she came to power. A little unaliving here, cozying up over there, playing the game until she got what she wanted. And there was this one time that she wasn't too happy with her son's politics, and it was likely he was going to have her power removed, so he needed to go on a timeout. She had some guards gouge his eyes out, which mortally wounded him. No big deal or anything. I guess there was no timeout corner back then. I went to Rome to the chief's palace. He bestowed upon me this wisdom after learning about Irene. That ain't it.
Number 10, Julie d'Aubigny, a sword-wielding opera singer? Yes, sign me up please. I am so here for this. There is so much to unpack about this story. So she was born the daughter of the secretary of King Louis XIV's Master of Horse. She moved to the court of Versailles in 1682. Her father was an expert swordsman and educated her alongside the boys he taught because she was his only kid. She even dressed as a boy and excelled at the sport. She ran off with a fencing master and toured, showing off her skills to wide audiences. One audience member, however, couldn't believe she was a woman because she was so good, so she flashed the crowd, who responded with complete stunned silence. She began singing at the Marseille Opera, where she met her first love, a young woman. This woman, though, was packed off to a convent by her family, and Julie followed to help her escape. They burned down the convent and ran off together, and she was actually sentenced to death by the parliament, but Julie would continue to live on, one adventure after the next. She would later be pardoned by parliament and continue to go on to become an opera star, and had many other lovers. Number 9. Betty Page. If you're a fan of pinup art, then you almost have to be a fan of the one, the only Betty Page. She is the one who defined the art form. Page was an American pinup icon who scandalized society with her risque and alternative kink modeling photos. We can thank her for the bikini, as it was Page herself who made it popular. Pop stars to this very day model themselves after her. Her iconic haircut being found on stars such as Katy Perry and Dita Von Teese. Her poses in her famous photos were found in music videos such as she had a massive amount of influence. She redefined a sexually repressed era with her free spirit and unabashed presentation of her sexuality, but she was taken advantage of a lot of the time. Betty actually didn't make any royalties after her prince until Hugh Hefner got her an agent. But by the end of the 1950s, Betty walked away after a nervous breakdown and retired as a born-again Christian. There was a lot of suffering that Betty didn't show to the world or even admit to herself. Sadly, the woman whose face everyone knew was diagnosed with schizophrenia due to severe trauma from her childhood. For years, no one knew if she had even passed away, but people were still obsessed with her until she was finally tracked down for a documentary. She refused to take any photos but would give interviews over the phone. She finally hired a lawyer to try and recoup some of the money she lost for her image and spent her final days living with her brother in LA. Number 8. Cleopatra. Cleopatra, the woman who had the world talking all the time. She made sure that whenever she entered the room, all eyes and ears were turned in her direction, jaws on the floor. She is one of, if not the most famous Egyptian queen to ever have lived. Believing she was the goddess Isis herself, she prepared dazzling entrances wherever she went. But it wasn't just her looks. In fact, some accounts say she wasn't actually particularly outstanding in that department. It was just the whole package in how she presented herself. It was indeed her wit, charm, intense intelligence that had men and nations kneeling to her. Her brother/husband wasn't a huge fan, as it was clear she was always trying to get past him to hold the whole title. But one way she overstepped her husband was when she had herself delivered to the Roman Emperor Caesar wrapped in a carpet naked. She easily won the senior emperor and gained him as her lover, and eventually she even won the Egyptian throne, soon to become the famous Queen of the Nile. Number 7. Mary Laveau. Mary Laveau is an absolute legend in practice and by lore. Her mysterious past and practices made her the absolute talk of the town. She was the voodoo queen of New Orleans. Voodoo or Voodoo is a combination of West African religions brought over to the Americas through the slave trade. It then blended with Christianity and the traditions of indigenous peoples. Marie was the first generation of her family to be born free, but due to laws and practices of the time, Marie and her husband bought and sold around 8 slaves in their lifetime, though it was also believed that she aided in the escape of slaves as well. But what she is most famous for is her work as a voodoo queen in New Orleans. Many wealthy and politically connected individuals paid Laveau to aid in personal advice, intervention, and protection from evil energy. She also worked as a hairdresser, which gave her access to information regarding her clients, because honestly, let's be honest, everyone's hairdresser is their therapist. Honestly, what didn't this woman do? She also ran an orphanage and helped many children have a safe home. Laveau is a popular figure in legend and lore due to her relationship to the occult, but her role in society was much larger and a little bit more scandalous than that. Number 6. Louisa Casati. Also known as the Divine Marquise, we have yet another woman of mystery on this list. Louisa Casati beguiled everyone she came across. She was a young, well-born heiress who married into the Lombardy aristocracy. The mundane was an insult to her. She dressed in extravagance wherever she went, dyeing her hair fiery shades, darkening her eyes with makeup and contouring with kohl. Her guiding principle in life was to imitate art, as opposed to art imitating life. But due to her extravagant presentation, she became the muse of dozens of famous artists. Thanks to her immense fortune, she traveled the world, leaving a trail of lavish parties that even Gatsby would gawk at. Every party topped the last. She had a collection of very special drugs, naked servants gilded in gold, wild animals. Her tombstone reads, "Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety." Number 5. Madam C.J. Walker. Madam C.J. Walker broke records and blasted through glass ceilings as the first self-made female person of color millionaire in America. She made her fortune thanks to her homemade line of hair care products for black women. Her parents were slaves who worked in Louisiana, but she was the first of their children to be born free after the Emancipation Proclamation. After an experience with hair loss, she created the Walker system of hair care. She had a knack for self-promotion that started by selling directly to the clients and then employed beauty cultural capitalists to hand sell her wares. She not only continued to build her business, but she also kept a hand behind her to help lead future generations towards success. Walker used her fortune to help fund scholarships for women, donated large sums to NAACP and the Black YMCA, among other charities. An absolute legacy. Number 4. Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft is a feminist icon who began setting the groundwork for women's rights all the way back in the late 1700s. She authored A Vindication of Rights of Women in 1792, which is considered the earliest treatise advocating for women's rights. Wollstonecraft was born in the age of the Enlightenment in England. The Enlightenment is pretty much as it sounds, an intellectual period which advocated for reason to obtain objective truths. As part of this movement, Mary and her sister founded a girls' school in London in 1784 to educate young girls. She continued to write articles advocating for the education and equality of women in society throughout her life. She believed that if women weren't educated to the same degree as men were, then society would come to a standstill. Sadly, Mary never fully saw the success of her ideas. She died during the birth of her second daughter, Mary, who, funny enough, would go on to write one of the most controversial books in history, Frankenstein. Number 3. Mae West.
I see a man in your life.
What, only one?
Mae West. As sassy as she was on screen, she was even more so off of it. Her wisecracking, quippy sensuality became a sensation people couldn't get enough of. West started out in vaudeville and Broadway before she hit the big screen, singing and doing acrobatics. By 1926, Mae began to write and produce her own plays, the first being titled Sex. Her performance was of a woman of the night, and you can imagine the stir she caused. It also earned her an 8-day jail sentence for corrupting the morals of youth. She loved to ridicule social attitudes towards sexuality, which became a part of her trademark style. She was also a big supporter of the gay community, even writing a play called Drag as a celebration of drag in New York City, on top of it being a living room comedy. As you can guess, this also stirred up some serious controversy. But despite it all, West seemed to enjoy the reaction of the private and reserved public, loving every minute that it made her famous. Number 2. Marsha P. Johnson. Marsha P. Johnson is most famously known for her work to help support the LGBTQ+ movement in New York City for nearly 25 years. Marsha played a key role in the Stonewall riots that found the gay pride movement today. She was a drag performer and black trans woman who did everything she could to advocate for trans youth, homeless people, and people living through the AIDS epidemic. She even used money she earned as a night worker to help fund a refugee for homeless people. Along with fellow activist Sylvia Rivera, she founded STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, which created a safe place for homeless trans youth to sleep and feel safe. It was the first LGBTQ+ shelter in North America. Sadly, however, Johnson never got to see how far the movement would take the world, as she died in 1992. Her body was found in the Hudson River, and it was ruled that she took her own life. However, many suspect foul play, as her case was never actually investigated, they just assumed. Many activists believe today that someone had indeed taken her life. Marsha P. Johnson danced, performed, and rioted her way to making the public listen to the voices people were afraid to hear, and her legacy lives on today. And last but not least, Rosa Parks. One of the loudest scandals in history that ferried in waves of change was the decision Rosa Parks made one day to stay seated on a bus. It was a scandal that transformed the world. In 1955, Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus to a white man from Montgomery, Alabama. This simple and brave refusal initiated the civil rights movement in the United States. Her actions inspired the Montgomery bus boycott, led by a young Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Up until this point, bus segregation was enforced, and the black community was forced to sit in the back of the bus always. It was also customary for bus drivers to request that black citizens give up their seat to white citizens. So one day when Parks was riding home from work, she was exhausted, the bus driver asked part of the back of the bus to stand to make room for a white citizen. Parks was the only one who refused, and she was arrested as a result. In her autobiography, Parks writes, and I quote, "People always say that I didn't give up my seat because I was tired, but that isn't true. I was not tired physically. No, the only tired I was tired of giving in."